Hi guys, and welcome back to our next lecture on our World War II series. Last time we met, we talked about Hitler's use of the Blitzkrieg tactic and how successful it was. Within 10 months, he'd taken over pretty much all of Europe, the same extent of the Roman Empire at its height about 2,000 years earlier, and here Hitler has done it within the period of 1 year. Today we're going to be turning and first taking a look at how the United States responds to this. Of course, after the Battle of Britain, Britain had secured its shores for at least for the time being, but now that Europe has fallen under Nazi control, how does the United States respond? FDR has always kind of had one foot wanting to get into this war and kind of help out the Allies, but American public sentiment has kind of held him back. We're going to end today's lecture by also taking a look at what happens after the Nazis take full control, and that is the early stages of the Holocaust. We're going to take a look at how each of the stages kind of evolved. We're going to see the full extent of the damage that was done, the millions upon millions of lives that were taken, that were violently tortured, brutalized, killed, and we'll talk about the impact that has. I will mention that the Holocaust is always one of those topics that we could spend quite seriously our entire lives studying and still not know everything about it. For this class, in our American history class, we don't tend to focus as long on the Holocaust because next year you guys will take world history where it's a more European-centered focus, and you guys will focus much more heavily on it then. So anyways, we'll briefly talk about the Holocaust and try to get as much of the gravity of that event as possible. All right, well, go ahead and get your notes out. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first of all, how the United States is responding to this attack on Europe. And I've titled this, America's Neutrality Wanes. So up to this point, American sentiment has tried to keep us out of this war. FDR has realized that we're going to eventually have to stand up to Hitler. And so we're going to start seeing a series of laws that get put in place, recognizing that fact. And even though we're not fully in the war yet, we're going to see even the first attack on American sailors during this lecture. And the war is coming quite quickly. So the first thing that I want to discuss is the Selective Service and Training Act. We discussed the Selective Service in our World War I unit when we talked about the draft that occurred in that combat. In September 1940, we are going to have, specifically after Paris falls, that's kind of the big catalyst for this, Congress authorizes the first peacetime draft in U.S. history. That should tell you a lot, right? I mean, even though we're not in this war yet, all of a sudden we're holding a draft to bulk up our military forces to prepare for this fighting. We know it's coming. We know we have to be ready to go if something were to happen. We know that the Nazis, if they've taken over Europe, what's going to stop them from heading across the Atlantic towards our shores? And in fact, there had already been sightings of Nazi submarines along the East Coast, so we knew they were there. We had caught even Nazi spies within the United States. So, this was a very real threat, and so we had to get the military bulked up and ready to go. Number two, the Atlantic Charter. Even though we obviously leaned onto the side of Britain, the Atlantic Charter kind of was an agreement between the United States and Great Britain about what a post-war world should look like. Before we entered any solid alliances, we did want to make sure that we were on the same page with these countries. Now, Britain, for decades, for centuries really, has had the strongest empire in the world. The time of empire is starting to die away, and in fact what we're going to see after the war is that many of these old world empires do begin to crumble. In August of 1941, we signed an agreement with Great Britain called the Atlantic Charter, in which we agreed to a post-war world that needs to focus on building up, number one, democracy. Okay, we both agree that the future world should be more democratic. If if democracy is in place in more countries, then hopefully that'll lead to less war. The age-old saying, no two democracies have gone to war with one another, and technically that is true as far as I know. And so, pushing this idea that a world after this war would be a democratic one as much as possible. But they did talk about other issues, economic issues. They talked about non-aggression between their two countries. We talked about free trade, some economic advancement, and even freedom of the seas, that everyone should have access to trade and whatnot. So we did sign that agreement with Britain, and one step closer towards kind of cementing our alliance with them. Number 3 is one of the biggest laws that comes out of this pre-war era for us, called the Lend-Lease Act. In March of 1941, again, FDR is trying to find a way to help our allies, but without getting us directly involved in the war. Beginning with this Lend-Lease Act, we would lend the allied nations. We did not trade with the Axis countries, of course, but we lent $50 billion, with a B, $billion worth of supplies, including food and military products. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, kind of this is early in the war, but you can see kind of the breakup of where that money went. But we sent it to allied nations, including France and China. Eventually, this will include the Soviet Union, even though right now they are still in a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany at this point in our story. But this, in a lot of ways, effectively ends our isolation. Or excuse me, perhaps I should say neutrality, not isolation. But this, in a lot of ways, ends our neutrality. We are actively supplying one side of this war, and even though we're not officially at war, we are actively backing one side of it, a non-interventionist policy. Number 4, March of 1941, and I will tell you, by year's end we will be at war. Okay, but March 1941, we agree with the United Kingdom on a Europe first strategy. We have not talked about the Japanese for quite a while, since the very beginning of this lecture series. But the Japanese have been fighting in China, and basically Churchill, the leader of Great Britain, if you have not written that down, you do need to know that. You do need to know the leaders of these countries and where the countries are on a map. I'll just tell you for your test. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Yeah, Churchill and FDR get together, and we agree to a Europe first strategy. Hitler had to be faced first, okay? And that's what it means by Europe first, that if the United States were to hypothetically get involved in this war, we had to focus on defeating Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany first, and then we could turn our sights towards Japan, okay? Number 5, and this event almost gets us into the war, okay? September of 1941. Basically, it was a German attack on a U.S. ship, the USS Greer, and this attack resulted in FDR really debating on whether to get the United States involved in this war. Do we take it to Congress at this point and ask for a declaration? Ultimately, FDR responded by issuing an order that was called a shoot-on-sight order. If you see a Nazi submarine, if you see a Nazi ship in the Atlantic, you fire upon it. Shoot on sight. That's pretty much war. I mean, that's, we are there in all but name. And so, it is becoming increasingly hostile. I mean, it is a warlike state in the Atlantic Ocean. The war has been going on for 2 years at this point, so it kind of makes sense. But attacks would continue. This would not be the last U.S. ship that was sunk. The USS Reuben James was sunk a month later, and that killed 115 Americans. So that was not just a small amount of loss of life. So we're seeing here that our neutrality is pretty much over, that we are actively involved in this war on the Allied side, and even issuing proclamations and policies directly attacking Nazis when we are encountering them. It'll be literally 2-3 months away from the time Pearl Harbor occurs, so we are very, very close to war. And the next time we do get together, you will see America's entrance into this war. We're going to shift gears a little bit. As I said, the war has been going on 2 years at this point. I want to return our sights back to Europe and identify what's happening specifically with the Holocaust. I always like to begin by showing these two maps side by side, showing the Jewish populations of Europe in 1933 and then the Jewish populations in 2017. And you'll notice some trends here. Of course, with Poland, Poland is the first location of the Nazi invasion. You can see that the amount of Jews in Poland decrease over those 70 or 70 years, approximately 80 years. From a total of 3 million Jews to a total of less than, just barely over 3,000 Jews in Poland by 2017. The Holocaust that we are about to describe, I know we've all heard of it. I know we've all probably learned about it at some point. I guess I would like to issue kind of a warning or something to kind of meditate on as we go through and talk about some of these statistics and definitions. First of all, I wanted to present this as humanly as possible, and what I mean by that is we so often, when we're talking about this war, we present it as a group of statistics. Okay, 11 million people dying in the Holocaust. Okay, absolutely correct. 6 million of them being Jewish. Those are statistics. When you break it down, though, what we're talking about, men, women, children, we're talking about mothers and fathers, we're talking about sons and daughters that have been ripped from their family and brutally murdered from a racist political party. I never want you to forget these faces that you see in these photographs and imagine what it must have been like, because these people are absolutely no different from you and me, besides the fact that they were born in a different time and place. And they were locked up, they were tortured, and they were murdered because of their faith. The Holocaust is one of the, if not the worst, chapter in human history. And I want to make sure we lend as much gravity to that as possible. So again, I wish we had more time to discuss it. We're going to get into some details about it and look at where this was taking place, the process in which it took place. But just understand that even though we may be getting into some very, frankly, just gross statistics, when you break it down, this is happening to people just like you and me, and I never want you to forget that. So let's define exactly what the Holocaust was. And the term Holocaust was actually something that was applied after the war. The genocide, we really had not seen anything like this in world history. But there had been genocides before. In World War I, there was a genocide, the Ottomans attacking the Armenian people. There have been other genocides since then, but this genocide was unlike any other. So to define it, the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 11 million people. Now, a genocide is when you target a specific group of people and you try to eliminate them completely. That is what the Jews were. They were the target of the Nazi Party here. Let's break down that 11 million number. About 6 million, the greatest of those, the 11, the majority of them were Jewish people, but that left 5 million others. The Germans called them Untermenschen, and I don't speak German, so that pronunciation might have been horrible, but Untermenschen, which translates roughly as subhuman. That is what the Nazis called these groups of people, and they included many different types of people, not just political opponents, but gypsies. This included homosexuals, the disabled, mentally ill. This included political opponents, if I didn't say that already, Freemasons. This included gypsies, communists. So basically anyone that the Germans saw as kind of a plague or drain on their society, they rounded up and they killed them. This included teachers. This included artists. This was not just people that were collaborating against the Nazis. This was people that they just did not like the fact that they existed in this world, and they wanted to rid them from German society. Before the war, there were approximately 9 million Jews that were living in Europe, and about 2/3 of those would be killed in the Holocaust. It's a sickening number. It's a sickening number. Number 2 there, it says the final solution. The final solution to what? Well, ever since the Nazis had been created and Hitler was rising up, there had always been what they called the Jewish question. What do we do with the Jews? And initially, the way the Nazis handled it was they tried to kind of round them up. Initially, they were placed in the poorest parts of cities and literally there were fence lines put up around these parts of the cities called the ghettos, and they were not allowed to exist outside of that. If a Jew was found outside of the fence line of the ghetto, I mean, they were shot on sight. They were killed immediately. But that couldn't last. It was overcrowded. It was in the middle of the city, and it was very public. Eventually, the Nazis will develop a multi-stage kind of policy on how to handle that Jewish question. And ultimately, what they arrive at is what they called the final solution, and that was the extermination of these people, the killing, the mass murder of the Jews and all the remaining Untermenschen. Let's talk about this in kind of different stages or different phases here. We've already seen a couple of these occur. The Jews have already been targeted in a series of laws called the Nuremberg laws. We saw the Nazis forced the Jewish people to wear a yellow Star of David on their clothing. It forced them to, there were certain rules and laws on who they could marry, who they could not marry. It stripped property rights, civil rights away from the Jewish people. So we've already seen that. It's a slow process. The Nazis didn't wake up one day and say, hey, listen, let's just kill all the Jews. This was a slow process, and it evolved over time. We saw Kristallnacht, where it became basically excused to commit violent acts against the Jewish people. In Kristallnacht, that's basically the government kind of giving, a lawless night to thugs and roaming bands of Nazis to attack Jews. So that's kind of the first stage where we see this kind of legal, at first kind of legal argument against the Jews, then some violence occurring. But phase number 2 is partly what I was just describing with the rise of the concentration camps and the Jewish ghettos. The Jews, after they lost their property rights in the Nuremberg laws, the government literally would come in and force them out. They would come into somebody's house or an apartment and tell them to drop everything. They could pack a suitcase full of clothes that frankly would be discarded, and they were forced into ultimately a train, well, at first the ghettos, as I just mentioned, but eventually a train car that would take them out to concentration camps that were mainly held outside the cities, often in the countryside. So the Jewish ghettos were kind of that second phase, where they tried to just basically concentrate the Jewish people, and again the Untermenschen as well. I get the question every year, well, why didn't they fight back? Why, if they see what's happening, and granted they can't predict the future, but if they see kind of the fact that the Nazis are forcing all of these people to kind of in these situations, why didn't they fight back at all? And the answer is they did. In many cases they did. In fact, the largest of all the ghettos was in Warsaw, Poland, and in fact the revolt there, the uprising there, was initially somewhat successful. The Polish Jews in Warsaw, this uprising included about 30,000 people, and in fact they were able to hold the Nazis out of Warsaw for about 4 months. They were able to basically hold up and kind of rebel. But eventually, I mean, the Nazis are the strongest army on earth at this time. So, a group of unarmed Jews are not trained for the military. They just did not stand a chance. And ultimately, other groups that did try to fight back, again, even especially when you get into concentration camps, I mean, what are you going to fight back with? I mean, no weapons. Even though you have a lot more numbers, your numbers don't matter anything to a machine gun that's placed on top of a guard tower. So it was certain death if they fought back, and they knew that. So it was a horrible situation for them to be placed in. And but these concentration camps did begin forming, and at first, they were rounding these people up and placing them in the concentration camps. Once the final solution was agreed to by the high Nazi authorities, they did begin phase 3, and that was the extermination process. The largest of all the extermination camps was Auschwitz-Birkenau, the deadliest of all the concentration camps, in which 1.1 million people were killed in Auschwitz alone. As I said, ultimately that number would grow to about 10 times that amount throughout all of Europe. Many simply missing as well. This was also included random acts of violence, not just concentration camps and organized violence. But as you saw in that initial graphic, the Jewish population in Europe really never was able to get back on its feet, at least in Europe and most countries. Now, I won't get deep into it here, but we're a few years away. After the war, we will see the establishment of Israel, and so a lot of Jews do immigrate to the Middle East at that time, partly explaining why there are lower amounts in 2017. But ultimately, the Holocaust is one of the most evil chapters in American history and world history, excuse me, and it shows just how far evil and hate can go, because these were not criminals. These were innocent people just like you and me. These were children that they tortured and they killed. So again, I wish we had more time to go into this. It's something that should weigh heavily on you. But hopefully next year in world history, you guys can maybe do some research on it more. And again, this is a heavy topic, and one that when we're in person, well, I almost always spend most of the class period answering questions. So I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have. We do have an assignment over the Holocaust that I would like you to complete, which has you looking at some identifications of people that were placed in the concentration camp. Some survived, some did not. So I hope you find that an interesting assignment. Guys, email me those questions. I'd be happy to get back to you. I want you to be able to ask anything you have. Thank you for paying attention today. And next time in our lecture, we'll see the United States enter the war after Pearl Harbor, and we'll get to fighting. All right, thank you.